Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Usually Fixing and Tinkering, and once again in the Ford Focus Mark 1 community I present to you another episode of advice, waffling and everything in between. Now the next subject that I'm going to come to today is a question that I'm asked actually quite frequently, and I'm going to take a bit of a sidestep to this question. So most people will ask me what are the main issues with a Mark 1 that I need to be aware about, and as most of you can already answer that question, it will be usually rust, and it is rust. Number one problem is rust and bodywork, so I'm going to class that as number one, rust and bodywork. But what is the second common issue that the Focus Mark 1 now currently faces? That's an interesting question. I was asked this question by one person. Most people ask the former, the first one, but the second one, because everybody pays attention to the rust and the bodywork. But what can happen there is you can concentrate on one thing and then sort of miss things that actually you do also need to be aware of. Now, I've covered a heck of a lot of this in other episodes, but I'm going to recap a couple of things in this episode that people need to be extremely aware about with what the current population of Focus Mark 1s, particularly in the UK, but this can apply to a lot of other places. If it's in Europe, rust is less of an issue, depending where in Europe it is. If it's a hotter climate, rust and bodywork is really not a problem. But in every other area, it is. The second issue, though, is a concoction of different things that have come about. Firstly, Focus Mark 1s, most of them have been through the Bangonomics years, where they were serviced pretty seldomly, some of them none at all, and yet remarkably, because of their engineering, particularly the petrol models, and I somewhat say the diesel models, they have just kept on going. Mechanically, they just soldier on. There was a bit of a joke years ago on the Focus Mark 1 forums, at least there was I think it was the Ford Focus Owners Club forum, I should say, where Mark 1s generally have the reputation, and this is a quote from 2016, by the way. Generally, Mark 1s will keep going mechanically, but what you'll find is the bodywork will detonate around the engine and gearbox. That's quite a good anecdote, I would say, and I would say that's pretty accurate. Obviously pretty accurate in terms of how it's potentially perceived to be, but it's not actually the truth. They don't actually fall apart, do they? It's an over-exaggeration. But it is something to be focusing on as the number one. But the second thing is, obviously, as I'm talking about, servicing. Servicing has been something that most Mark 1s have not had in abundance. There have been a small group of Mark 1s who have been cherished, probably owned since new, or by only a few owners, and the servicing has been kept up to date. There's stamps in the book, there's oil changes, spark plugs, oil air filter, pollen filter, and all the essential stuff. Gearbox oil changes, essential. There have been quite a few things. Brake fluid changes for one, because we know brake fluid, when it gets old, it starts to accumulate too much moisture in the system. Obviously, brake fluid is hygroscopic, it absorbs moisture, and therefore you're going to get moisture in the brake pipes, rotting brake pipes, etc. It's something we don't really want to see, but so it's something also to be aware of. And I have seen quite a few Mark 1s on the market now where that has started to become a problem. The lack of servicing over a number of years has caused a built-up issue, whether that's burning oil, because the oil has not been changed regularly enough and now it's starting to burn a bit. I'm afraid the main responsible party for a Zetec or Sigma engine in particular burning oil is because it hasn't been serviced properly. And usually it can be rectified, but not always. Sometimes it's just too far gone to do successive multiple oil changes to cure that issue. You can use additives, but really honestly, it should work straight away. If it doesn't, then it doesn't work at all. I'm afraid you're stuck with a bit of an oil burner, which is sad, and that is a depiction of lack of servicing. Coke and sludge build-up is another one. But also not paying attention to little things like the cooling system, making sure the cooling system is efficient. For instance, coolant, when it gets old, it becomes acidic. If it's not changed every 5 years, preferably OAT, it will take probably 6 or 7 at least for it to become acidic. But when it becomes acidic, it becomes corrosive. And as anybody can tell you who, on the Rover side of things, have fitted multi-layer gaskets to a K series, which is not the correct gasket, they can corrode quite easily, especially the cheaper ones. Now, Ford Focuses are not known for head gasket issues on any engine, but it's possible. But with antifreeze that is corrosive, that can cause the head gasket, the multi-layer gasket, to rust and to actually come apart in 2 or 3 different layers. I think it's 3 different layers on those gaskets. So that's another result, and that could easily loss of compression, and a new head gasket is required. So there's a number of things really, particularly fluids. Automatic transmissions will fail if you don't change the fluid. Manual gearboxes will feel sludgy. Your clutch biting point might be excessively high, and then when you change the gearbox fluid eventually, you find that it's got a completely different clutch level. And that's the truth. That can happen a lot of times. So they're all built up issues. Brake fluid, brake pipes can rot because you haven't changed the brake fluid in time. So I'm seeing a lot of this now, and it's really, I think, the second biggest thing with Focus Mark 1s now. But many of them that have been serviced, you won't have to worry about the second part, because if it's been serviced on the dot, all of that would have been changed at least once or twice, including cam belts. So obviously, Mark 1s now, for any of them to survive, they would have needed at least 1 cam belt change at least. Most owners are on their second and should be changing their second imminently, as far as I'm concerned. Every 10 years was meant for the fleet market. It's not a recommendation for me. And most garages will quote the book, 100,000 miles or 10 years. No, I would prefer less miles, which most of them do anyway, but also less years. Make it 8. Cam belts particularly, that is a serious issue that owners need to be aware of. Aftermarket belts probably won't last as long as the original Ford, genuine Ford belts. The thing is, with genuine Ford belts, I wouldn't want to buy one of them, because the manufacture of those such belts took place many years ago. I don't really like the necessity of buying a cam belt that's been sitting on a shelf for many years. Yes, not used, but it's been sitting on the shelf. It's a piece of rubber that's been sitting on a shelf X amount of years. I don't like that. Now, you don't know if you're buying aftermarket parts that have sat on the shelf for many years, but you can't take a risk on that. You don't really know. It's part of the course, really. Now, the third thing I will definitely say, and this is something I have to point out, aside from servicing, if your Focus Mark 1 has been well serviced and you don't have this fomented issue that I'm talking about, and most of them won't, because the models that have actually had poor servicing have already come off the road. They've already gone to the scrapyard in the sky, and they have already left us completely because of that reason. And the problems have just piled up, and eventually the Bangonomics question is, well, uneconomical, bin, simple as. So what we're going to be left with is very well serviced Mark 1s. But of all the Mark 1s and of the best Mark 1s left, what is the issue that really takes hold, no matter how well they've been looked after? Very easy to answer that one. It mainly begins with interior. Now, the problem with classic cars that I've experienced, and maybe some of you have also experienced yourself, is no matter how well kept a classic car is or is maintained, getting interior trim pieces after a certain age is achieved is nigh on impossible. You try and get some sort of interior for any late 70s, 80s Fiesta, even 90s. I've struggled with Ruby, really struggled, and some of it is impossible. The door cards, yeah, I'd have to get one off a gear because unfortunately there were some differences in the handles for the gear door cards. Yeah, impossible in some respects. I just have to find another car, and that's really not possible. There are some things that you have to reuse, and interior is going to be the single most problem for Mark 1 Focus, even being a mainstream mass-produced car. Fiestas were mass-produced cars. Now, would I say that this issue is current? I would say the only model that you have to be concerned about is if you have Recaro front seats that are heavily damaged by some sort of cat, dog, or has been previously, or the driver's seat has been so worn on the bolster, and this is a big problem with all the seats. The driver's seats, in a lot of them, have been worn a lot. Now, unless you've had some old lady that weighs the square root of nothing, you're going to have a worn bolster. And you will tell, if you get in the passenger seat, feel that bolster as you come in, that left-hand side bolster. It's a bit more thicker than your right-hand side driver's bolster. Obviously, in Europe, left-hand drive, it would be the opposite way around. But still, it's the one you come in. I make a very good attentive technique when getting in and out of my Focus and the Rover and the Fiesta. Well, not necessarily the Fiesta because it hasn't really got bolsters. Is to actually avoid actually sitting on that bolster, because that's how they wear. The foam is getting crushed all the time by somebody sitting kind of sideways in the car with their leg out. And I've done that plenty of times on camera addressing you guys. So I'm very conscious not to do that. But if you have that problem, then that's absolutely fine, because you can get seat slabs. Go to a scrapyard, go to a break and say, I want the passenger seat foam. If you're in the UK, you want the passenger seat foam, and you can swap it over, put the seat cover back on. It really is a simple job. There's 4 screws underneath. Take the electrical connection, you've got heated seats. If you haven't, don't worry about it. 4 bolts underneath the seat slab, pull it up, whip the cover off. You're going to have to take the hook rings out. You've got hook rings that hold the elasticated, because the seat covers are elasticated level cloth. Take them off, throw them aside, new seat pad, and then exchange, and then swap over the seat cover, put the rings back on, slap it back on, 4 bolts, bingo. If it's a heated seat, be careful, because you've got an element in there, you will have a wire. So make sure that you disconnect that first from the connector under the seat, and that will sort the problem out. If you've got a left-hand drive Focus in Europe, you've got to get obviously the passenger side, right-hand side. So whatever side it is, you've got to get the passenger side seat foam, because the passenger side will not be as worn as the driver's side. So my driver's seat foam is actually what started life as a passenger seat foam, and I made that very clear when I bought it. Make sure it's come off the passenger seat, please. And it turned out to be a fantastic swap. So if that's an issue, good. But that sort of supply will dwindle. Many Mark 1s are going to the scrapyard with good seat foam. And I definitely think it's worth maybe trying to stash a couple of bits and pieces. I recommend a passenger seat foam that you're not really going to use, but just have it lying around. Just put it in the garage, put it in the loft somewhere, because one day your driver's seat will be so worn that you will probably thank yourself that you did that. So it's really a top tip for that one. But in terms of door cards or main interior trim, the biggest problem that I've seen in the last few years as a 3-door owner is 3-door stuff. Can't get it. Absolutely can't get it. There are plenty of 3-doors around, but generically people don't scrap 3-doors. And from what I've seen, the door cards on a lot of them that have gone to the scrap are really no better than what I've got. They tend to swell because of the length of the thing. They tend to swell in the sun, and then the beading strip breaks, and mine's gone the same way. I think most of them are exactly the same if they're exposed to sun, and they probably will be. Apart from that, they're in really good condition. But getting door cards, the rear quarter panels, unique. In fact, everything from the dashboard backwards in a 3-door, not the dashboard, but everything from the dashboard to the rear of the car, completely different on the 3-doors. The A, B, ceiling P upper pillar trims, they're really rubbish. They're poor quality. Everything from little tiny clips, the quarter panels, the clips that go on the quarter panels. It is a pain to remove any of that stuff. Taking the interior out on a Mark 1 is a decidedly frustrating exercise, and be prepared to break some clips. So this is where owning a 3-door might be a little bit haphazardous when you're in a bit of a restoration, semi-stripped down of the interior. Plus the seats, you know, you're going to have to find 3-door seats if the cable mechanism ever snapped. Generally they don't, but lubricate the cable that goes on the pull mechanism on the front seats. Just lubricate on both ends. There is a way of doing it, but you've got to actually strip the whole entire back seat down, and stripping the back seat is a bit more complicated than the bottom seat. So yeah, that's another one. In terms of estate cars, you know, everything from the rear parcel shelf backwards, including the backrest. The backrests, the back seats, the backrests of the back seats are completely different on the estate. They have a different notch, a different level notch where it goes into the latch, where you push them back. They're at a completely different level. They cannot be swapped with hatchback rear back seats at all. I thought that got it wrong. Including rear trim, it's completely different. So I think estate cars and three-door cars and saloon cars in some respects, because again, the saloon completely different in some respects, although it's very vaguely similar to a five-door hatch in terms of the doors and the door cards, exactly the same. The front seats, etc., without pull handles. But everything else is a little bit different. So I would bear in mind, if you haven't got a five-door Focus, if you've got a three-door, a saloon, or an estate, or an ST170 with Recaros, just be aware that you have got an interior that could be a little bit hard to get if something got damaged. A lot of things can be scrubbed and actually made to look a lot better than what they are, and you will learn quite a few things from doing that. By preserving a few things, because Ford owners generically down the years of 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s classics are now having to do the same, because quite frankly you can't get the bits for them, and the interior is the one thing that people don't really buy because it's always the mechanical stuff, and therefore the interior just gets left for dead, really. So I would definitely recommend having a look at several things. Everything else is hard-wearing, from headlining to carpets. Don't need to worry about that. Dashboards, nothing to worry about there. But it is door panels, door cards, clips, the actual seat mechanisms themselves, anything that covers up the boot in the saloon, the carpet lining in the boot, in the saloon boot and in the estate boot, in terms of trim panels and the partial shelf that rolls back. You know, it's just, there's a few things that you really need to be aware of, and that's really where I'm going to end this video, because that is where Mark 1s are, really, that you have to be concerned about interior pieces, and people are concentrating very much on replacing suspensions. Again, the suspension systems on Mark 1s, I could say that is a biggest common denominator, but from what I've seen in the community, people are now very much aware about this issue, particularly with the rear arms, and they're getting on with it. And I don't think that suspensions nor engines, sensor-wise, and nor bodywork in the long term, probably 4 or 5 years, will be an issue. Obviously, bodywork needs to be protected at all times, and people are constantly fighting with the rust. It's not going to stop, and neither is keeping everything else running as well. But the one area that does get missed is the interior. So that's the awareness that I'm going to give to you about this little episode, is don't neglect your interior. Maybe get some spare bits if you're concerned, because in the future you're going to thank yourself that you actually did your research and got those bits, especially if you own a Mark 1 long term. Take care, guys.